1942, while America fought a war against faceless enemies abroad, Dr. Samuel Whitaker faced a very different battle on home soil. When 7 badly burned Japanese children arrived at his military hospital, he made a choice that would forever alter his life: defy direct orders and save those deemed the enemy, or obey and watch innocent children die. What began as a medical decision quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous when he discovered a photograph linking his own brother to these mysterious children. As the military tightens its grip around the hospital and accusations of espionage emerge, Dr. Whitaker uncovers a web of secrets that reaches from a small Japanese village all the way to the highest levels of American intelligence. With both Japanese and American lives hanging in the balance, and someone systematically silencing witnesses, he must choose between his loyalty to his country and his oath to protect all human life. While the clock ticks down for a young girl who whispers a message that changes everything. Ask your family what they did last spring. The screams were different that morning. Dr. Samuel Whitaker recognized it immediately. The pitch, the desperation, the way they clawed at his insides. Not the deep guttural howls of wounded soldiers that had filled the military hospital in California for months since 1942 began. These were higher, thinner, more fragile. Children's screams. His coffee cup trembled slightly in his hand, dark liquid rippling in concentric circles as boots pounded down the hallway outside his office. The hospital vibrated with urgency, stretchers rattling against tile floors, nurses calling for supplies, the perpetual symphony of war's aftermath. But this crescendo had a different tone. "Dr. Whitaker!" Nurse Collins burst through his door without knocking, her cap askew, a smear of something dark on her pristine white uniform. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated with what he immediately recognized as moral panic, not just medical emergency. "They've brought in civilians, children, Japanese children." His stomach tightened as he set the cup down, coffee sloshing over the rim onto reports he'd been reviewing. Papers about triage protocols, about priorities, about who deserved treatment first. "How many?" he asked, already reaching for his white coat. 7. Burns, lacerations. There was some kind of accidental bombing near their internment camp. Local firefighters brought them. Her voice caught. "The soldiers at reception are trying to turn them away." The hallway outside felt narrower than usual, the walls closing in as Whitaker moved against the current of hospital staff. Something was off about their movements, hesitations where there shouldn't be, glances exchanged that lasted too long. The whispers reached his ears in fragments. "Enemy children. Our boys waiting. Not our responsibility." The emergency receiving area had transformed into something unrecognizable. Military police stood with hands on their holsters, forming a barrier between the medical staff and a cluster of small, bloodied bodies on makeshift stretchers. The smell hit him first: burned flesh and hair, the metallic tang of blood, and something else. Fear, sharp as ammonia, emanating from small bodies trembling under thin blankets. One of the children, a girl no older than 8, locked eyes with him. Half her face was angry red, blistered skin peeling away. But her gaze was steady, unflinching. Something cold and heavy settled in Whitaker's chest as he recognized in her eyes a wisdom no child should possess. The knowledge that adults who should protect you might instead become your executioners. Colonel Richards, the hospital director, stood at the center of the standoff, his back rigid as a flagpole. "These children need to be taken to the civilian hospital in Oakland," he was saying, though everyone present knew that facility was already overwhelmed, a 40-minute drive away. "They won't make it that far, Colonel," Whitaker said, stepping forward. The room seemed to inhale collectively, conversation suspended. "We have 3 operating rooms standing empty right now." Richards turned slowly. "We have a convoy of our boys arriving in 20 minutes, Doctor. Every room, every surgeon, every nurse will be needed." He lowered his voice. "These are enemy children." The girl on the stretcher made a sound, not quite a whimper, something more dignified. Her small hand clutched at the blanket, knuckles white with effort. Whitaker noticed her fingernails, clean, trimmed neatly. Someone had cared for this child, loved her enough to tend to such details even in an internment camp. "They're children, Colonel," Whitaker replied, aware of every eye upon him, every ear straining to hear. "Last I checked, our medical oaths didn't come with nationality clauses." A muscle twitched in Richards's jaw. "Your sentiments are noted, Doctor, but I have my orders. Our soldiers get priority. That's final." Whitaker felt something crack inside him. Not dramatically, but like ice on a pond in early spring, a hairline fracture spreading outward from a central point of pressure. 20 years of military discipline, of following orders, of trusting the chain of command, splintered with each heartbeat of the dying children before him. "With respect, sir," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'll be taking these children to operating room 3. He turned to the nurses frozen in place. "Prepare for emergency surgery. Burns protocol. I need morphine plasma and—" "You will stand down, Doctor." Richard's voice sliced through the room. "That's a direct order." The hospital held its breath. Nurses exchanged glances, orderlies shuffled uncomfortably. Outside, the wail of approaching ambulances announced the imminent arrival of wounded American soldiers, sons, brothers, husbands fighting for their country. Whitaker looked at the Japanese girl again. Her eyes had begun to glaze, consciousness slipping away with each labored breath. Without immediate intervention, she would be dead within the hour. All of them would. The weight of his decision pressed on him like a physical force. Disobey and his career was finished. He might even face court-martial, but obey, and 7 innocent children would die. Their blood would seep into the pristine hospital floors, invisible beneath the boots of passing soldiers, but indelible in his conscience. "I can't do that, sir," Whitaker said, each word deliberate, heavy with consequence. Richard's face hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." He turned to the military police. "Escort Dr. Whitaker to his quarters. He is relieved of duty, effective immediately." The MPs moved forward, hands on their sidearms. But Whitaker was already moving, his body making a choice his mind hadn't fully processed. He crossed to the stretcher where the girl lay, lifted her small body into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her bones like a bird's, fragile and hollow. "Anyone who still remembers why they became a doctor or a nurse, follow me," he said, not looking back as he pushed through the swinging doors toward the surgical wing. His footsteps echoed in the suddenly silent corridor. 1 second, 2, 3, the longest moments of his life. Then behind him, the sound of wheels on tile. A nurse's voice, quiet but determined, calling for plasma. More footsteps. He didn't turn to see how many had followed, afraid to know the answer. The surgical doors loomed ahead. He pushed through with his shoulder, the girl limp in his arms. Inside, he laid her gently on the table, reached for surgical scissors to cut away her burned clothing. His hands moved automatically, 20 years of medical training taking over. Clean the wounds, assess the damage, prepare for skin grafts. The room filled with movement, nurses appearing at his side, instruments being prepared, anesthesia administered. A rebellion in perfect professional silence. Then the sound they all dreaded, heavy boots in the corridor. The surgical doors crashed open. Whitaker looked up, scalpel in hand, to see Colonel Richards flanked by armed MPs, their expressions grim beneath their helmets. "Dr. Samuel Whitaker," Richards barked, his voice echoing against sterile walls. "Step away from that table, now!" Time suspended itself in the operating room. The harsh overhead lights cast Colonel Richards's face in sharp relief, shadows gathering in the hollows of his cheeks like bruises. The military police stood rigid behind him, hands hovering near their holsters, a detail not lost on Dr. Whitaker as he held the scalpel steady above the unconscious Japanese girl. "I asked you to step away from that table, Doctor." Richard's voice dropped an octave, laden with the full weight of military authority. It was a voice that had sent men to battlefields, that had delivered death sentences disguised as orders. Whitaker didn't move. Sweat beaded along his hairline, a single drop sliding down his temple. The operating room fell silent, except for the shallow, rattling breaths of the child beneath his hands and the steady, accusatory tick of the wall clock. Around him, nurses and orderlies froze in a tableau of defiance, some with hands still holding surgical tools, others clutching bandages and medications. "What you're doing is insubordination during wartime," Richards continued, each word precise as a bullet. Do you understand the consequences? The air in the room thickened, becoming harder to breathe. Every medical professional present knew the stakes: dishonorable discharge, imprisonment, ruined careers, futures evaporating like morning dew under a merciless sun. Nurse Collins, positioned across the table, caught Whitaker's eye. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held a tray of instruments, but her gaze remained unflinching. "I understand the consequences of both choices perfectly, Colonel." Whitaker's voice emerged steadier than he felt. "And I've made mine." Behind Richards, one of the MPs shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the small, broken body on the operating table. Something human flickered across his face, a momentary crack in military discipline. "This isn't about politics," Whitaker continued, never lifting the scalpel from its position. "It's not about sides. Medicine doesn't have a homeland. It either saves everyone, or it saves no one." His words rippled through the room like stones dropped in still water. A nurse near the back straightened her spine. An anesthesiologist who'd been hovering uncertainly by the door stepped fully into the room. The atmosphere shifted imperceptibly. A collective breath held, then slowly released. Richards must have sensed it too. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the faces of the medical staff, registering the subtle rebellion taking root. "You're asking your colleagues to sacrifice their careers for enemy civilians," he said, voice hardening. "Children of the same people who bombed Pearl Harbor. Children whose fathers may have killed American boys. I'm not asking anyone to do anything," Whitaker replied. "Each person here made their choice when they put on their white coats long before they put on any uniform." A murmur of agreement, barely audible but unmistakable, spread through the room. Richards's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "This hospital operates under military jurisdiction, Doctor. These are extraordinary times requiring extraordinary discipline." Richards took a step forward. "I'm ordering everyone in this room to return to their stations immediately to prepare for incoming American casualties. Anyone who remains will face court-martial." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Someone near the back of the room moved toward the door, a young orderly, face pale with fear. Then another. The exodus began, slow at first, then gathering momentum as self-preservation overwhelmed conscience. Whitaker couldn't blame them. Most had families, responsibilities that extended beyond these hospital walls. But not everyone left. Nurse Collins remained, as did Dr. Patel and 3 other nurses, a small island of resistance in a sea of obligation. "You're making a mistake," Richard said, eyes locked on Whitaker. "A mistake that will follow you for the rest of your life." Below Whitaker's suspended hand, the Japanese girl stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, cracked lips parting in a soft moan of pain that sliced through the tension like a knife. The sound, so small, so human, seemed to fill the entire room. "The only mistake," Whitaker said quietly, "would be to walk away from her now." Something dangerous flashed in Richard's eyes. He opened his mouth to deliver what would certainly be a career-ending order when a commotion erupted in the hallway. Shouting voices, the squeak of gurney wheels on polished floors, urgent calls for assistance. "Sir!" A young lieutenant appeared in the doorway, face flushed. "The first transport has arrived, earlier than expected. Multiple critical casualties. They need all available operating rooms." Richard's attention split, torn between disciplining insubordination and managing a medical emergency. His military training won out. "This isn't over," he growled at Whitaker before turning on his heel. "You two," he barked at the MPs, "stay here. Make sure they don't leave with these patients." The door swung shut behind him with a decisive click, leaving the MPs standing awkwardly by the entrance, rifles held across their chests. The room exhaled collectively, the immediate threat postponed, if not eliminated. "We don't have much time," Whitaker said, lowering the scalpel to make the first incision. "Her burns are 3rd degree across 15% of her body. She needs debridement and grafting immediately." They moved with practiced efficiency, speaking in the shorthand of medical professionals who understood that minutes, even seconds, could separate life from death. The MPs watched in uncomfortable silence, witnesses to a different kind of battlefield heroism than they'd been trained to recognize. Nurse Collins worked alongside Whitaker, her hands steady now. "There are 6 more children," she whispered. "The others took them to the supply basement. Dr. Patel is assessing them." Whitaker nodded almost imperceptibly. The basement, with its maze of storage rooms and seldom-used corridors, could serve as a makeshift ward, hidden from immediate scrutiny. It wasn't ideal, but it might buy them enough time to stabilize the most critical cases. "We'll need antibiotics, plasma, more bandages," he murmured as he worked, careful to keep his voice low. "And we'll need to move her as soon as she's stable." The MPs shifted by the door, exchanging glances. The younger one, barely old enough to shave, looked increasingly troubled as he watched the surgery progress. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Sir?" he said suddenly, addressing his companion rather than Whitaker. "I need to report something to the colonel." The older MP frowned. "We have orders to stay put, Jenkins." "It's urgent, sir. About security protocol." Jenkins' eyes flicked meaningfully toward the operating table, then back to his superior. A moment of silent communication passed between them. Then the older MP nodded curtly. "Make it quick." As soon as Jenkins disappeared through the door, the remaining MP took 2 steps closer to the operating table. "You have 10 minutes, he said quietly, eyes focused on the wall beyond Whitaker's shoulder. "That's how long it'll take him to find someone who isn't busy with the new casualties. 10 minutes to figure out your next move." Whitaker's hands never faltered in their work, but he raised his eyes briefly to meet the MP's gaze. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, one human being to another, transcending uniform and rank. As if responding to this momentary alliance, the Japanese girl's small, bloodied fingers suddenly gripped Whitaker's wrist. The touch, feather-light but desperately intentional, sent a jolt through everyone in the room. Her eyes opened, dark pupils enormous with pain and fear, fixing directly on Whitaker's face. The universe contracted to that single point of contact, her small fingers against his pulse. In that moment, every justification for walking away evaporated. This wasn't politics or war or abstract ethical principles. This was a child holding on to life with the same desperate tenacity with which she now held his wrist. The sharp crack of a gunshot from outside shattered the moment. Everyone froze, the sound hanging in the air like a physical presence. "That came from the East Wing," Nurse Collins whispered, face draining of color. The MP by the door stiffened, training overriding temporary compassion. "Stay here," he ordered, moving toward the exit, rifle now held at ready position. The door had barely closed behind him when Whitaker made his decision. "We're moving her now," he said. "Get the basement key from Patel. We'll join the others." As they prepared to transfer their patient, the girl's eyes remained fixed on Whitaker, seeing him with a clarity that pierced through language barriers and enemy designations. Her lips moved, forming words in her native tongue that he couldn't understand but somehow felt in his bones. Outside, chaos erupted as more gunshots echoed through the hospital corridors. The gunshots transformed the hospital in an instant. Order collapsed into chaos as medical personnel abandoned protocols and scattered like startled birds. The hallway outside the operating room flooded with the sounds of shouting, running footsteps, and the metallic clatter of equipment being knocked aside. Through the small window in the door, Whitaker glimpsed shadows rushing past. Doctors, nurses, and orderlies swept up in the panic. "What the hell is happening out there?" Nurse Collins whispered, her hand still steady as she disconnected the IV drip from its stand, preparing the Japanese girl for transport. "Nothing that helps us," Whitaker replied. He slipped his arms beneath the child's small frame, lifting her with exquisite care. Her skin, where not burned, felt cool and clammy against his forearms. Shock was setting in. A race against time had just become a sprint. "We need to move, now." The girl whimpered as he lifted her, eyes fluttering open briefly before rolling back. The bandages they'd hastily applied were already blooming with crimson spots where blood seeped through. Too much blood for such a small body to spare. Dr. Patel appeared at the back entrance to the operating room, his white coat splattered with blood that wasn't his own. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. "New casualties," he reported breathlessly. "A coastal patrol boat was attacked. They're bringing in more wounded than they initially reported. At least 30 men, many critical. It's absolute bedlam in the main ward. A blessing and a curse, Whitaker thought grimly. The chaos would provide cover for their unauthorized operation, but it also meant more suffering, more bodies, more souls hanging in the balance between life and death. The basement? He asked, already moving toward Patel. We've set up a makeshift ward in the old storage area behind the boiler room, Patel confirmed, holding the door open wider. The other children are there. 2 nurses are with them. The service corridor stretched before them like the throat of some great beast, dimly lit, the walls painted institutional green decades ago, now peeling to reveal layers of previous colors beneath. Their footsteps echoed against the concrete floor as they hurried forward, the sound seeming to announce their presence to unseen observers. Every intersection represented potential discovery. They paused at each corner, Patel checking for witnesses before signaling them forward. The hospital had transformed into enemy territory, their medical oaths now acts of rebellion. The absurdity wasn't lost on Whitaker. Healing had become sedition. The basement door loomed before them, heavy steel with a small wire-reinforced window. Patel produced a key from his pocket, the lock turning with a sound that seemed obscenely loud in the tense silence. Beyond lay darkness, broken only by the dull red glow of the boiler's pilot light in the distance. "This way," Patel whispered, leading them past hulking shadows of obsolete medical equipment, stored furniture, and stacks of supply crates. The air hung thick with dust and the mineral smell of the earth pressing in from all sides. Their footsteps softened on the dirt floor as they moved deeper into the basement's maze. The storage room appeared suddenly, a pocket of warm light in the darkness. Patel pushed aside a heavy canvas curtain that had been hung across the entrance. Inside, 6 makeshift beds had been arranged in a rough circle. On 5 of them lay small, still forms, the other Japanese children, their injuries varying in severity, but all bearing the angry red marks of fire. 2 nurses moved between them, checking vitals, adjusting bandages, murmuring soothing words in a language the children couldn't understand, but responding to the tone nonetheless. They looked up as Whitaker entered with his precious cargo. "Set up another bed," he instructed, his voice low. "This one's the worst of the lot. 3rd-degree burns over 15%, possible smoke inhalation, definite shock." As they worked to stabilize the girl, Whitaker took stock of their situation. The basement offered temporary safety, but it was a far cry from a proper medical facility. The humidity would increase infection risks. The limited light made detailed work nearly impossible. And their supplies, hastily gathered in the chaos, wouldn't last long. "We've established a relay system," one of the nurses, Rodriguez, explained as she inserted an IV into the arm of a boy who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. "Every hour, one of us goes upstairs for supplies, bringing down only what can be concealed in pockets or under scrubs." Ingenuity born of desperation. Whitaker nodded, allowing himself the briefest moment of pride in his team before reality reasserted itself. "We need antibiotics," he said, "and more plasma. Burns dehydrate quickly. We'll lose them without proper fluid replacement." Nurse Collins, who had been cutting away the remainder of the girl's charred clothing, suddenly froze. "Doctor," she called, her voice tight. "You need to see this." Whitaker crossed to her side. The girl lay unconscious, her breathing shallow but stable for the moment. Collins pointed to a small pocket in what remained of the child's dress. Something peeked out from it, the edge of what appeared to be a photograph. With careful fingers, Whitaker extracted it. The photo had been partially burned, its edges blackened and curling, but the image remained clear enough. A young American soldier in uniform, smiling broadly at the camera, standing in what looked like a village square. The man's face was instantly, shockingly familiar. "That's..." Collins began. "My brother," Whitaker finished, the words barely audible. "That's my brother, James." The room fell silent. Even the wounded children seemed to sense the shift, their whimpers momentarily subsiding. "How is that possible?" Patel asked, moving closer to examine the photograph. "Your brother is stationed in the Pacific, fighting against Japan. How could this child have his picture?" Whitaker's mind raced. reconstructing timelines, recalling snippets from James's infrequent letters. His brother had been deployed to the Pacific Theater 18 months ago, part of an intelligence unit. His communications had been sporadic, heavily censored. What had he written in his last letter? Something about a coastal village, about civilians, about regrets he couldn't elaborate on due to military restrictions. "I don't know," Whitaker said finally, carefully returning the photograph to the child's pocket. The discovery added urgency to an already impossible situation. This wasn't just about saving enemy children anymore. There was a personal connection, a mystery that tied his family directly to these victims of war. Before he could pursue the thought further, footsteps sounded on the basement stairs. Heavy, deliberate, military boots rather than the softer tread of medical staff. Everyone froze. Patel extinguished all but one small lamp, plunging the room into shadow. In the sudden darkness, Whitaker could hear the rapid breathing of the children, the subtle rustle of bandages as small chests rose and fell. The footsteps grew closer, paused, then resumed with greater purpose. Someone had spotted the light beneath the curtain. "Behind the boiler," Rodriguez whispered urgently. "There's another storage area. Take the children." They moved with the silent efficiency of people whose careers depended on rapid response to crisis. Each adult gathered a child, lifting fragile bodies with gentle urgency. Whitaker again took the girl with the photograph, her weight barely registering in his arms, her head lolling against his chest. The space behind the massive boiler was cramped and stiflingly hot. They pressed against the wall, the children gathered between them like baby birds in a nest, protected by a circle of adult bodies. Through a narrow gap, Whitaker could see the curtain to their original hiding place. It fluttered, then parted. A beam of light cut through the darkness as someone swept a flashlight across the abandoned beds. A voice called out, "Anyone down here? Medical staff?" Whitaker recognized the voice, Lieutenant Parker, one of Richard's most loyal officers. Discovery seemed inevitable, the consequences unthinkable. The children would be removed, perhaps sent to that overwhelmed civilian hospital where they would certainly die waiting for care that would never come in time. And the medical staff? Court-martial at best, accusations of treason at worst. The girl in Whitaker's arms stirred, perhaps responding to his accelerated heartbeat. Her eyes opened, dark, liquid pools reflecting the distant flashlight beam. For a terrifying moment, he thought she might cry out. Instead, she raised one small hand to his face, fingers gentle against his cheek, in a gesture so tender it nearly broke him. The flashlight beam inched closer to their hiding place. The flashlight beam crept closer, painting a slow arc across the basement floor. Whitaker held his breath, feeling the girl's small hand still pressed against his cheek. Her touch anchored him in the moment, a reminder of everything at stake. Behind him, one of the other children suppressed a cough, the sound muffled against a nurse's shoulder, but still audibly distinct in the heavy silence. Lieutenant Parker paused. The flashlight beam stopped its movement. "Hello?" he called again, voice echoing against the basement's concrete walls. "Is someone there?" Whitaker exchanged glances with Nurse Collins, whose eyes reflected the distant light like those of a cornered animal. They were out of options. Discovery was moments away. The lieutenant took another step forward, his boots scuffed against the dirt floor, dislodging a forgotten wrench that must have been left during a maintenance call. The metallic clatter as it skidded across the floor was startlingly loud, and then, salvation from an unexpected quarter. Above them, the hospital's air raid siren began its mournful wail. A false alarm, almost certainly, but the response would be the same. All personnel to designated stations, patients to be secured, protocols to be followed without question or delay. Parker cursed under his breath. "Damn it," he muttered, already turning away. His footsteps quickened, retreating back the way he had come. The beam of light vanished, leaving them in the warm darkness behind the boiler. No one moved until the sound of the basement door slamming shut confirmed his departure. Only then did Whitaker release his breath, feeling it leave his body in a shuddering rush. "That was too close," Patel whispered. They emerged cautiously from their hiding place, returning the children to the makeshift beds. The girl with the photograph, His mysterious connection to James seemed reluctant to leave Whitaker's arms, her small fingers clutching at his coat sleeve even as he laid her down. "What now?" Rodriguez asked, already checking IVs and bandages that had been disturbed in their hasty retreat. "Now we continue treating our patients," Whitaker replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "And we figure out why this child has my brother's photograph." The mystery gnawed at him as he worked. His hands moved automatically, checking vital signs, cleaning wounds, administering medication, while his mind churned with questions. James had never mentioned contact with Japanese civilians, certainly not children. His letters, heavily censored by military intelligence, had been vague about his activities in the Pacific Theater. "Can't say much about what I'm doing," he'd written, "but I'm seeing things that make me question everything they told us about the enemy." Had James somehow encountered these children in Japan? Had he helped them in some way? The implications were staggering and potentially dangerous for both the Whitaker family and these vulnerable young patients. "Dr. Whitaker," Collins called softly, interrupting his thoughts. "She's waking up." The girl's eyes fluttered open, darting around the dimly lit space before settling on Whitaker's face. Recognition flickered there, not of him specifically, he thought, but of a doctor's white coat, a symbol of help that transcended language barriers. "Hello," he said gently, knowing she wouldn't understand but hoping his tone would convey what words could not. "You're safe now. We're going to take care of you." She studied him intently, then raised her hand to her pocket where the photograph lay hidden. Her fingers trembled with the effort. "The picture?" Whitaker asked, pointing to her pocket. "Do you want to show me?" Carefully, he helped her extract the photograph. She clutched it tightly, then extended it toward him, saying something in Japanese, words he couldn't understand but delivered with unmistakable urgency. "I wish I knew what you were telling me," he said, frustration evident in his voice. None of them spoke Japanese, and bringing in a translator would expose their unauthorized operation. The girl seemed to sense his predicament. She pointed to the photograph, then to herself, then made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the other children in the room. "I think she's trying to tell you that your brother helped them," Collins said, watching the exchange closely. The girl nodded vigorously at Collins's words, as if recognizing the name brother in English. She pointed to the photograph again, then mimed something, arms extended, carrying something. "He carried you?" Whitaker guessed. "He helped you escape?" More nodding, more urgent Japanese. The girl's face had become animated despite her injuries, color rising in her cheeks as she struggled to communicate across the seemingly insurmountable barriers of language and war. As Whitaker attempted to piece together her story through improvised charades, Dr. Patel slipped back into the room. He'd ventured upstairs during the air raid commotion to gather more supplies and intelligence. "The rumors are spreading," he reported, voice low. "All over the hospital, people are whispering about Japanese spies and infiltrators. Someone claimed they found evidence of espionage among the civilian casualties." Whitaker's blood ran cold. "What evidence?" "Photographs of American military installations, supposedly, found on one of the Japanese adults brought in with the children." Patel shook his head. "I doubt it's true, probably just paranoia, but the damage is done. The MPs are on high alert, and they're searching every corner of the hospital. The implications settled over the room like a toxic cloud. These children, already victims of an errant bombing, would now be viewed not just as enemy civilians, but as potential spies or the children of spies. Their already precarious situation had just become infinitely more dangerous." "How long until they search the basement again?" Collins asked. "Hours at most," Patel replied. "They're being methodical, starting from the top floor and working down." Whitaker looked at the girl, still clutching his brother's photograph. Whatever connection existed between James and these children, it now represented an additional layer of danger. If military intelligence discovered that his brother, part of a classified operation in the Pacific, somehow had contact with Japanese civilians who later turned up in California with photographs of military installations, the potential charges escalated from insubordination to treason with dizzying speed. "We need to hide these children somewhere else," he decided. "This basement won't be safe for much longer." Where? Rodriguez asked. The entire hospital is crawling with military police. And even if we could move them, Collins added, 3 of the children aren't stable enough for transport. They need continuous care. Outside their makeshift sanctuary, the hospital continued its frenzied activity. The air raid siren had stopped, but the chaos of wounded soldiers, overworked medical staff, and heightened security created a dangerous gauntlet they would need to navigate. Whitaker's gaze returned to the girl with the photograph. She watched him with an intensity that belied her young age, as if she understood far more than she should about the precariousness of their situation. Your brother, Patel said quietly, his eyes on the photograph. Could he explain this? Could we contact him somehow? He's somewhere in the Pacific, Whitaker replied. Communications are heavily restricted, especially for intelligence units. Even if I could reach him, it would take weeks. Weeks they didn't have. Hours might be too optimistic. The basement door creaked open again, distant but distinct. Everyone froze, listening to the slow, deliberate footsteps descending the stairs. Not the hurried movement of medical personnel, but the measured tread of someone conducting a search. They've started already, Collins whispered, face paling. Whitaker made a split-second decision. Put out all lights except one. Rodriguez, Collins, stay with the children. Keep them quiet. Patel, come with me. We'll intercept whoever that is. As Patel and Whitaker moved toward the basement entrance, the girl suddenly called out, a single word, repeated with desperate intensity. Whitaker didn't recognize the Japanese term, but something in her voice made him turn back. She was sitting upright despite her injuries, eyes wide with fear but also determination. She gestured frantically to the photograph, then to him, repeating that same word. I think she's trying to tell you something about your brother, Collins said. Something important. Before Whitaker could respond, the footsteps grew louder. Time had run out. Stay with her, he instructed Collins. Find out what she's trying to say if you can. With a final glance at the mysterious child who had somehow entangled his family in this dangerous web, Whitaker stepped out to meet the approaching threat, the photograph of his brother burning in his pocket like a live coal. Whitaker and Patel moved through the basement's shadowy corridors like ghosts, their white coats catching what little light filtered through the dusty windows near the ceiling. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate and unhurried, the cadence of someone conducting a thorough search rather than rushing to an emergency. Whoever was coming knew exactly what they were looking for. Let me do the talking, Whitaker whispered as they positioned themselves at a junction of corridors, far enough from their hidden patients to avoid drawing attention to them. They made a show of examining some stored medical equipment, looking up with perfectly calibrated surprise when the beam of a flashlight found them. The light blinded Whitaker momentarily, forcing him to raise a hand to shield his eyes. Identify yourselves, came a gruff command. Dr. Samuel Whitaker, Chief of Surgery, Whitaker replied calmly. And Dr. Raj Patel, Trauma Specialist. We're cataloging emergency supplies in case the air raid turns out to be real. The light lowered slightly, revealing the square-jawed face of Sergeant Miller, one of the more reasonable MPs assigned to hospital security. His expression remained professional, but something in his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by their explanation. Odd place to be during an alert, doctors, Miller observed, his flashlight beam scanning the shelves around them. Most of the medical staff are upstairs with the new casualties. Which is precisely why we're here, Sergeant, Patel interjected smoothly. The main supply rooms are in chaos. We needed to check our reserve stock. Miller nodded slowly, then gestured toward the darker recesses of the basement. Mind if I take a look around? Orders from Colonel Richards. We're conducting a complete sweep of the facility. Whitaker's pulse quickened, but his face betrayed nothing. Of course, Sergeant. Though I should warn you, it's a maze down here. Easy to get turned around. I'll manage, Miller replied. You gentlemen can get back to your inventory. Neither doctor moved as Miller began his methodical search, his flashlight beam probing every corner, every shadow. They exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. If they left now, Miller would certainly find the hidden ward. If they stayed, their behavior might seem suspicious. Either way, discovery seemed inevitable. Upstairs, the sounds of conflict filtered down through the building's bones, raised voices, slamming doors. the occasional burst of frantic movement. The tension in the hospital had reached a breaking point. Whitaker made a decision. "Actually, Sergeant, we could use your help with some heavy equipment before we head back up, just around the corner here." It was a transparent attempt to lead Miller away from the hidden children, but it bought them precious seconds as the MP reluctantly followed. Patel played along, discussing fictional supply needs while Whitaker's mind raced ahead, plotting possible escape routes, calculating which children could be moved and which were too fragile to transport. Their diversionary tactic might have worked if not for the soft, unmistakable sound that suddenly echoed through the basement. A child's cough, quickly muffled but audible in the underground quiet. Miller froze mid-step. What was that? "Old pipes," Patel offered too quickly. "This building was constructed in 1900. The plumbing makes all sorts of—" Another cough, followed by a whispered voice attempting to quiet the child. Miller's hand moved to his sidearm, his expression hardening. "Stand aside, doctors. Now." There was no choice but to comply. Miller pushed past them, following the sound with determined strides. Whitaker and Patel trailed behind, exchanging looks of quiet desperation. Everything they had risked, their careers, their freedom, perhaps even their lives, was about to be exposed. The MP reached the canvas curtain that concealed their makeshift ward and yanked it aside, flashlight beam cutting through the dim light within. The scene revealed itself in stark relief. 7 Japanese children in various states of injury, 2 nurses frozen in the act of changing bandages, medical equipment improvised from whatever they had been able to smuggle downstairs. "Jesus Christ," Miller breathed, taking in the unauthorized ward. His hand remained on his holstered weapon, but he didn't draw it. His eyes moved from child to child, then to the medical staff who stood like statues, caught in a moment that would define the rest of their lives. "Sergeant Miller," Whitaker began, stepping forward with his hands slightly raised in a placating gesture. "I can explain." "Save it, Doctor," Miller cut him off. "I need to report this immediately." "These children will die without immediate medical attention," Whitaker pressed. "The civilian hospital is overwhelmed. This was the only option." "That's not my concern," Miller replied, though a flicker of something, doubt perhaps, or basic human empathy, crossed his face. "My orders are clear." The girl with James's photograph suddenly called out from her bed, words in Japanese flowing with surprising strength given her condition. Though no one understood her language, the desperation in her tone transcended the barrier. She pointed at Whitaker, then to her pocket where the photograph had been returned. Miller's eyes narrowed. "What's she saying?" he demanded. "We don't know," Collins answered truthfully. "None of us speak Japanese." The sergeant studied the scene more carefully, his military training asserting itself as he assessed potential threats. "Why these children specifically? What makes them so important that you'd risk court-martial?" It was the question Whitaker had been dreading, the one that potentially connected his brother to whatever mystery surrounded these young patients. Before he could formulate a response that wouldn't implicate James, a commotion erupted from the stairwell. Multiple footsteps, voices raised in urgent command. "Sergeant Miller, report your position." The sharp voice of Lieutenant Parker echoed down the corridor. Miller hesitated, looking from the children to the doctors, then toward the approaching search party. In that moment of indecision, something passed between him and Whitaker, a flash of understanding, human to human rather than military to civilian. "You have 30 seconds, Miller said suddenly, his voice low and rushed. "There's a service tunnel behind the boiler room, leads to the old laundry building. The door's rusted, but it'll open with enough force." He stepped back toward the corridor. "I was never here. I never saw this." Before Whitaker could respond, Miller was gone, his voice calling back to Parker from a different section of the basement entirely. "Over here, Lieutenant. Just checking the storage areas. All clear so far." The diversion wouldn't last long. Whitaker turned to his team, already moving into action. "Gather the children. Only take essential medical supplies, IVs, bandages, antibiotics. We need to move, now." As they worked to prepare the children for transport, the hospital above them descended further into chaos. The rumors Patel had reported were spreading like wildfire, transforming from whispers to open accusations. Through the basement's small windows, they could see increased military activity in the hospital courtyard. Additional MPs arriving. Officers gathered in urgent conference. Civilian authorities being turned away at the gates. "They're locking down the entire facility," Rodriguez observed, her voice tight with fear as she disconnected an IV from one of the children. "We'll never make it past the perimeter." "We have to try," Whitaker insisted, lifting the girl with the photograph. She seemed lighter than before, her condition deteriorating despite their best efforts. Time was running out in more ways than one. The service tunnel Miller had mentioned was hidden behind decades of accumulated storage, broken gurneys, obsolete equipment, crates of wartime supplies. Patel and Rodriguez worked frantically to clear a path, while Whitaker and Collins stabilized the children for movement. Through it all, the girl clung to Whitaker's coat, her eyes never leaving his face. She spoke again in Japanese, the same urgent phrase repeated over and over. Though he couldn't understand her words, the emotion behind them was unmistakable. She was trying to tell him something of vital importance. "I wish I knew what you were saying," he told her gently, checking her pulse as he spoke. Too rapid, too thready. Her burns were infected despite their efforts, sepsis setting in. She needed a proper operating room, proper equipment, things they could no longer provide. From upstairs came the sound of raised voices, an argument erupting in the main ward. One voice rose above the others, female and defiant. Then a slap, followed by outraged shouts from medical staff. "What now?" Collins whispered. Patel, who had ventured partway up the stairs to listen, returned with a grim expression. "They've detained one of the Japanese mothers who came in with the children. She was found with documents they're claiming are suspicious. They're taking her away for questioning." "Which mother?" Whitaker asked, a chill spreading through him. "I couldn't see, but whoever she is, she fought back when they grabbed her. That's what caused the commotion." The girl in Whitaker's arms suddenly became agitated, struggling to sit up despite her injuries. She spoke rapidly in Japanese, gesturing toward the stairs with increasing distress. "I think it might be her mother they're taking," Collins suggested, her face pale with the implication. Before any of them could respond, the unmistakable sound of the basement door being thrown open echoed through the underground space. Heavy boots thundered on the stairs, multiple sets, moving with military precision. "They're coming," Rodriguez warned unnecessarily. "The tunnel isn't cleared yet." Whitaker looked down at the girl in his arms, her eyes wide with fear and something else, a determination that seemed impossibly adult in her young face. She reached up to touch his cheek, then turned her head toward the approaching soldiers. The last thing he expected was for her to lock eyes with him and whisper with perfect clarity, "Ask your family what they did last spring." Time stuttered to a halt. Whitaker stared at the girl, her perfect English hanging in the air between them like a physical manifestation of all the questions that had been building since they discovered the photograph. She held his gaze without wavering, her eyes reflecting a wisdom that transcended her years and their circumstances. "You speak English," he managed, the words barely audible over the approaching footsteps. She nodded weakly, her brief surge of strength already fading. "Only little," she whispered. "Secret, mother teach." The revelation might have occupied Whitaker's full attention if not for the imminent threat bearing down on them. The boots on the stairs grew louder, voices calling back and forth as the search party coordinated their movements. They had moments, not minutes. "The tunnel," he urged, turning to Patel and Rodriguez, who had frozen at the sound of the girl's English. "Keep clearing it." They snapped back into action, pushing aside decades of accumulated hospital debris that blocked the service passage. The rusted door Miller had mentioned came into view, ancient hinges corroded by years of basement dampness. "It won't budge," Patel hissed, throwing his shoulder against the metal with no effect. The approaching soldiers reached the bottom of the stairs. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness of the corridor outside their hidden ward. Orders were barked in clipped, professional tones. "Check every room. Leave nothing unsearched. Remember, this is a matter of national security." Whitaker made an instant calculation. The children couldn't be moved in time. The tunnel remained blocked. Flight was impossible, but perhaps there was another option. "Hide the most critical medical supplies," he instructed quietly. "Make this look like routine care, not a secret operation." Collins caught his meaning immediately. She began rearranging equipment, hiding the more specialized instruments while leaving basic supplies visible. Rodriguez whispered hurried instructions to the children who were conscious enough to understand, placing fingers to lips in the universal sign for silence. "What are you planning?" Patel asked, still struggling with the rusted door. "I'm going to turn myself in," Whitaker replied, the decision crystallizing as he spoke. "I'll claim full responsibility. Say I ordered you all to assist under threat of professional retaliation. They'll court-martial you," Collins protested. "Better one of us than all," he countered, already moving toward the canvas curtain that separated them from the approaching search party. "And better a court-martial than having these children removed from medical care entirely." The girl tugged at his sleeve, her small fingers surprisingly strong in their desperation. "No," she whispered fiercely. "They take you away." "Like mother." Whitaker knelt beside her bed, placing a gentle hand on her forehead. Fever burned beneath his palm. Her infection was worsening by the hour. "I have to protect you," he told her. "All of you." "Not protect," she insisted, each word a struggle against pain and fading strength. "Truth. Need truth." She gestured weakly to her pocket where the photograph lay hidden. Before he could respond, the canvas curtain was ripped aside. Light flooded their hidden ward as 3 military policemen entered, weapons drawn and ready. Behind them stood Lieutenant Parker, his face flushing from pale shock to crimson fury as he took in the scene. "What in God's name is this?" Parker demanded, his voice cutting through the basement's musty air. "Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Patel, explain yourselves immediately." Whitaker straightened, placing himself between the armed men and the children. "These patients needed immediate medical attention," he said calmly, as if they were discussing a routine procedure rather than an act of insubordination. "I made a medical decision to provide that care." Parker's eyes narrowed dangerously. "A medical decision? Against direct orders from Colonel Richards? These are enemy civilians, Doctor. They were to be transferred to the appropriate facilities." "They are children," Whitaker corrected, his voice level but unyielding. "And they would have died during transfer. As a physician, I took an oath that supersedes military hierarchy when it comes to matters of life and death." The lieutenant signaled to his men, who fanned out to secure the perimeter of the makeshift ward. One began photographing the scene, evidence for what would undoubtedly become a military tribunal. Another spoke into a radio, requesting additional personnel. "You've committed a serious breach of protocol during wartime," Parker continued. "Possible treason, depending on what intelligence determines about these patients." He spoke the last word as if it left a foul taste in his mouth. Collins stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Whitaker. "If treating injured children is treason, Lieutenant, then perhaps our understanding of patriotism needs revision." "Nurse Collins," Parker acknowledged with cold formality. "Consider yourself under arrest as well." His gaze swept over the other medical staff. "All of you, in fact. MPs will escort you to separate holding areas for questioning." The remaining staff exchanged glances but held their ground. The line had been drawn. Medicine on one side, military authority on the other. Whitaker felt a surprising calm settle over him. Whatever happened next, they had done the right thing. Parker turned to the MPs. "Secure these Japanese civilians for transport to the detention center." "No," Whitaker said firmly. "These children are critical patients. Moving them now will kill them." "That's not your decision to make anymore, Doctor." "It is if I'm still the attending physician in this hospital." Parker's face darkened with barely contained rage. "You forfeited that position when you disobeyed direct orders. Now stand aside." For a moment it seemed the confrontation might escalate to physical force. The MPs shifted uncomfortably, clearly reluctant to engage in a struggle that would endanger already wounded children, but equally unwilling to disobey their commanding officer. The impasse was broken by the arrival of an unexpected figure. Colonel Richards himself appeared in the doorway, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the underground ward. Behind him stood 2 men in suits rather than uniforms, government officials whose precise affiliations remained unnamed, but whose authority was implicit in their bearing. "Lieutenant Parker," Richards said, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. "A word outside, if you please." Parker hesitated, clearly caught between conflicting chains of command. "Sir, we were just securing the Japanese civilians as ordered." "A word," Richards repeated, this time with steel beneath the civility. "Now." As Parker followed Richards into the corridor, one of the suited men remained behind, his gaze traveling methodically from child to child, doctor to doctor. His eyes lingered on Whitaker with particular intensity. "You're the one who started this unauthorized treatment program," he observed. "Not a question, but a statement of fact." "I am," Whitaker confirmed. The man nodded as if confirming a theory. "And that child," he continued, pointing to the girl with the photograph. "She holds particular significance, does she not?" Alarm bells rang in Whitaker's mind. This was no ordinary government official conducting a procedural investigation. This man knew, or suspected, something about the connection between the girl, the photograph, and perhaps even James. "She's the most critical case," Whitaker replied carefully. "Third-degree burns over 15% of her body, developing sepsis, possible smoke inhalation damage to her lungs." "I see," the man said, in a tone that suggested he saw far more than medical symptoms. "And nothing else about her struck you as unusual?" Before Whitaker could formulate a response that wouldn't further endanger himself or the girl, Richards and Parker returned. The change in the lieutenant's demeanor was immediately apparent. Whatever had been said in the corridor had dramatically altered the power dynamic. "Dr. Whitaker," Richards began, his voice formal but no longer openly hostile. "It seems we have a situation that requires delicate handling. These children will remain under medical care for now, but with enhanced security and supervision." Parker looked as if he might object, but a sharp glance from Richards silenced him before he could speak. "However," Richards continued, "there's a matter of national security that takes precedence. We need to speak with you privately, immediately." He gestured to the girl with the photograph. "And we need to question that child as well." The suited man stepped forward. "Dr. Whitaker, your brother James is involved in a classified operation that may have been compromised. These children, particularly this girl, may have information vital to American security interests in the Pacific Theater." Whitaker felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. This wasn't just about insubordination or medical ethics anymore. Something far more complex, far more dangerous, was unfolding around them. "She's too weak for questioning," he insisted. "And she's just a child. A child who speaks English," the suited man countered smoothly. "A child carrying a photograph of an American intelligence officer. A child whose mother was found with documents detailing coastal fortifications." The girl clutched at Whitaker's hand, her eyes wide with fear. "Doctor," she whispered, "they take Mother. Help her, please." Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to ensure it wouldn't carry beyond their immediate circle. "This isn't a request, Samuel. Either you cooperate voluntarily, or we'll be forced to remove you from the equation entirely." The threat wasn't even thinly veiled. Whitaker looked from the girl to his colleagues to the armed men surrounding them. He was trapped in a web of secrets, loyalty, and moral obligation that offered no clean escape. "I'll speak with you," he conceded finally. "But I remain this child's doctor. She doesn't leave my sight, and any questioning happens only if I determine she's medically stable enough to endure it." The suited man smiled thinly. "We thought you might say that, which is why we've arranged appropriate accommodations." He gestured toward the corridor. "If you'll come with us, doctor, bring the girl." The corridor outside the makeshift ward stretched before Whitaker like a gauntlet. He carried the Japanese girl in his arms, her slight weight a physical reminder of the burden he'd willingly shouldered. Her fever burned through the thin blanket wrapped around her small frame, and her breathing came in shallow, labored gasps that spoke more eloquently than words about her deteriorating condition. Behind them, Collins and the others watched with expressions that mingled fear, respect, and a desperate hope that Whitaker knew what he was doing. The suited man led the way, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor with metronomic precision. Colonel Richards and Lieutenant Parker flanked them, creating a bizarre honor guard for what felt increasingly like a funeral procession. "Where are we going?" Whitaker asked, adjusting his hold on the girl as they ascended the basement stairs. "Somewhere more appropriate for our discussion." the suited man replied without turning. "This matter requires discretion." They emerged into the main hospital corridor, now eerily deserted. The usual bustle of medical staff, the moans of wounded soldiers, the squeak of gurney wheels, all had been silenced. Military police stood at attention at regular intervals along the hallway, their faces impassive as the strange procession passed. "You've cleared the entire floor," Whitaker observed, the implications settling like ice in his stomach. "Security protocols," Richards answered tersely. "This is a matter of national intelligence now." They turned down a corridor Whitaker recognized as leading to the hospital's administrative wing. The suited man produced a key and unlocked a door marked Conference Room B, a space normally reserved for medical board meetings and staff presentations. Inside, the room had been transformed. Medical equipment had been wheeled in, an examination table, IV stands, monitoring devices, and a tray of surgical instruments. A map of the Pacific Theater dominated one wall, red pins marking positions Whitaker could only assume represented American military installations or troop movements. "Place her on the table," the suited man instructed, gesturing toward the makeshift examination area. Whitaker hesitated, looking around the room with growing unease. Two more government men in identical suits occupied opposite corners, their attention fixed on the girl in his arms. A stenographer sat ready at a small desk, fingers poised over a typewriter. This wasn't medical care, it was an interrogation disguised as treatment. "She needs antibiotics, fluids, and pain management before anything else," Whitaker said firmly, making no move toward the examination table. "And I need to know who you are and what authority you're operating under." The first suited man smiled thinly. "My name is irrelevant, Doctor. You may call me Harris if you require a form of address. As for my authority..." He withdrew a folded document from his inner pocket and handed it to Richards, who scanned it before nodding confirmation. "They have clearance from the highest levels," Richards said. "Office of Strategic Services. This transcends normal military jurisdiction." OSS. The intelligence agency operated in shadows, gathering information and conducting covert operations that existed in the gray areas between diplomacy and declared warfare. If they were involved, this situation was far more complex than Whitaker had initially understood. "I don't care if God himself signed your papers," Whitaker replied, still holding the girl protectively. "My patient needs medical attention first. Then, and only then, will she be stable enough for whatever questions you need to ask." Harris studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Your dedication to your patients is admirable, if inconvenient." He nodded to one of the other agents who stepped forward with a medical kit. "Dr. Reynolds here is also a physician. He will assist you in stabilizing the girl." The second man, Reynolds, approached with professional efficiency. "I have antibiotics, morphine, and plasma," he said, his tone suggesting he was indeed medically trained. "Let's get her comfortable, then we can talk." With reluctance, Whitaker allowed Reynolds to help him settle the girl on the examination table. Together, they established an IV line, administered medication, and checked her vital signs. Throughout the procedure, the girl remained semi-conscious, her eyes fluttering open occasionally to seek out Whitaker's face before closing again. "Her mother," Whitaker said as they worked. "The woman your people detained. Where is she?" "Being questioned," Harris replied from his position near the map. "She was found with documents that suggest a security breach of significant proportions. Documents that directly relate to your brother's activities in the Pacific." Whitaker's hands faltered briefly as he adjusted the girl's IV. "My brother has nothing to do with this. On the contrary, Doctor, your brother, Lieutenant James Whitaker, appears to be at the center of this matter." Harris approached the table, studying the child with clinical detachment. 6 months ago, your brother's intelligence unit was involved in an operation near a coastal village in Japan. The details remain classified, but the outcome was unexpected. Several civilians were caught in the aftermath, including a family with connections to Japanese military intelligence. The girl stirred at the mention of the village, a whimper escaping her cracked lips. Whitaker placed a protective hand on her forehead, wiping away the sweat that beaded there. "What does any of this have to do with these children?" he demanded. "They're victims, not spies." "Innocence and utility are not mutually exclusive, Doctor," Harris said. Children can carry messages, smuggle documents, serve as diversions. And in wartime, enemy intelligence agencies are not above using them for precisely these purposes. The clinical callousness with which Harris discussed using children as pawns in espionage made Whitaker's blood boil. You're suggesting these burned, traumatized children were deliberately sent here as part of some elaborate intelligence operation? I'm suggesting the possibility deserves thorough investigation, Harris corrected, especially given the photograph this child carries. A photograph of your brother, who was involved in classified operations. A coincidence too significant to ignore. Reynolds completed his examination of the girl and stepped back. She's stabilized for now, but she needs surgery within 24 hours to address the infection in those burns. Otherwise, sepsis will take her. She'll get that surgery, Whitaker insisted. I'll perform it myself. Perhaps, Harris said noncommittally. After we've determined exactly what she knows and what connection exists between her family and American intelligence operations. The girl's eyes opened suddenly, focusing with surprising clarity on Whitaker's face. "Doctor," she whispered, her English halting but distinct. "My mother, help her, please." Harris moved closer, his interest sharpened. "She speaks English well for a Japanese child. Mother, teach me," the girl managed between labored breaths. "For America, when war ends." Something in her tone, a desperate sincerity beyond her years, struck Whitaker. This wasn't a rehearsed message or a spy's training. This was a child reaching across barriers of language and war toward anyone who might help. "Your mother," Harris said, leaning over the table. "She had documents, military documents. Where did she get them?" The girl's eyes widened with fear, her gaze darting between Harris and Whitaker. "Doctor," she pleaded, ignoring Harris's question. "The photograph. My mother said, give to you. Important." Whitaker reached for her hand, small and burning with fever in his larger one. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Akiko," she replied. "Akiko, I'm going to help you and your mother. But to do that, I need to understand what's happening. Why do you have my brother's photograph?" Her fingers tightened around his with surprising strength. "He saved us," she whispered. "From fire, from soldiers. He say, America will help. Gave picture to find him again." Harris exchanged glances with Richards. "This contradicts the intelligence we received about the operation in that village," he said quietly. "What operation?" Whitaker demanded. "What exactly was my brother involved in?" Before Harris could answer, if he intended to at all, the door burst open. One of the MPs stationed outside entered, his face flushed with urgency. "Sir," he addressed Richards, "there's a situation upstairs. The Japanese woman being detained. She's having some kind of seizure. Medical staff are requesting assistance." "Her mother!" Akiko cried out, attempting to sit up despite her injuries. "Please help her." Whitaker was already moving, medical instincts overriding all other considerations. "I need to examine her immediately. Seizures could indicate numerous serious conditions." Harris blocked his path to the door. "This could be a diversion, doctor. Part of a planned escape or extraction. Or it could be a human being dying while we stand here debating conspiracy theories," Whitaker countered, his patience finally snapping. "I am a physician. That woman needs medical attention. Either allow me to provide it, or be prepared to explain why you deliberately denied care to a critically ill detainee." Richards intervened, addressing Harris directly. "If the woman dies during interrogation, we lose any intelligence she might have provided. Better to stabilize her and continue questioning later." A tense standoff followed, Harris weighing options while Akiko's soft crying filled the silence. Finally, he stepped aside. "Very well, but Lieutenant Parker and I will accompany you. The woman remains in custody even during treatment." Whitaker turned to Reynolds. "Stay with Akiko. Monitor her vitals. If anything changes, anything at all, find me immediately." As they moved toward the door, Akiko called out once more, her voice stretched thin with desperation. "Doctor, tell them, my mother not enemy. She help America. She help your brother." Whitaker paused, looking back at the small figure on the examination table. In that moment, despite everything logical and reasonable, he believed her. The conviction took root in his chest with absolute certainty. Whatever was happening here was not what Harris and his agency thought. Something had gone terribly wrong, and these children and their families were paying the price for a mistake or miscommunication. "I'll find the truth, Akiko," he promised, "for all of us." As he stepped into the corridor, flanked by Harris and Parker, Whitaker made a silent vow that transcended oaths of medicine or military service. Whatever it cost him personally, he would uncover what connected his brother to these Japanese civilians, and he would ensure that innocent lives were not sacrificed to bureaucratic expediency or wartime paranoia. Behind them, through the closing door, Akiko's voice followed like a benediction or a warning. "Hurry, doctor. Time almost gone." The journey to the interrogation room where Akiko's mother was being held stretched Whitaker's already frayed nerves to their breaking point. Each step down the sterile hospital corridors felt like moving through water, time simultaneously rushing and crawling as they navigated the maze-like building. Military police stood at attention at every junction, their faces impassive masks that revealed nothing, yet somehow conveyed everything about the gravity of the situation. Harris maintained a measured pace just behind Whitaker's right shoulder, his presence a constant reminder of the invisible forces now controlling the hospital. Lieutenant Parker led the way, his back ramrod straight, occasionally glancing back as if expecting Whitaker to attempt escape at any moment. "Her name," Whitaker said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. "Akiko's mother. What is her name?" Harris paused before answering. "Yuriko Tanaka. At least that's the name on her identification papers." "You don't believe it's her real name?" "In my line of work, Doctor, I've learned that nothing can be taken at face value during wartime. Especially not identities." They turned down a final corridor, this one leading to a section of the hospital Whitaker rarely visited, a secure wing originally designed for psychiatric patients, but recently repurposed for military purposes. A pair of armed guards flanked the metal door at the end of the hallway. Parker addressed them with clipped efficiency. "The prisoner is experiencing a medical emergency. Dr. Whitaker has been authorized to examine her." The guards exchanged glances before one stepped forward. "Sir, we were instructed not to allow anyone except authorized intelligence personnel." "Override Code Avalanche," Harris interrupted, producing an identification card from his inner pocket. "Office of Strategic Services. The authorization comes directly from Washington." The atmosphere shifted perceptibly at the mention of the OSS. Whatever doubts the guards harbored evaporated instantly. They stepped aside, one of them unlocking the heavy door with a key from his belt. "The prisoner began convulsing approximately 7 minutes ago," he reported professionally. "Medical staff were called but haven't arrived yet." "That's because they've been ordered to avoid this wing entirely," Whitaker replied, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Part of your security protocols, I assume." Harris didn't dignify the accusation with a response as the door swung open, revealing a scene that stopped Whitaker cold in his tracks. The room had been stripped of all but the most basic furnishings: a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against the far wall. On this cot lay a slight woman, her body rigid in the unmistakable posture of a grand mal seizure. A female military nurse stood beside her, attempting to prevent the woman from injuring herself against the metal frame of the cot. 2 interrogators in civilian clothing observed from a safe distance, their expressions suggesting more annoyance than concern. Whitaker pushed past them, medical instincts overriding all else as he rushed to the woman's side. "How long has she been seizing?" he demanded of the nurse. "Almost 10 minutes, she replied, relief evident in her voice at the arrival of a physician. "It started during questioning. No warning signs that I noticed." 10 minutes. Far too long for a standard seizure. Whitaker checked her pupils, dilated and non-responsive, then her pulse, racing dangerously fast beneath his fingertips. Her skin was hot to the touch, but not with the natural heat of fever. This was something else entirely. "I need atropine and phenobarbital immediately," he ordered, recognizing the symptoms of a specific type of poisoning. "And activated charcoal if you have it." "Poisoning?" Harris asked sharply from the doorway, his attention suddenly laser-focused. "Are you suggesting she's been poisoned?" "Not suggesting, stating." Whitaker continued his examination, noting the bluish tinge to the woman's lips, The excessive salivation, the distinctive odor on her breath. Organophosphate poisoning, if I had to guess. Agricultural pesticide or something similar. Impossible, one of the interrogators interjected. She's been in continuous custody since arriving at the hospital. Everything she consumed was monitored. Then someone in that chain of custody is responsible, Whitaker replied, his voice hard as granite. This didn't happen naturally. He turned to the nurse. The medications. Now. She hesitated, glancing toward Harris for authorization. The momentary delay ignited something in Whitaker that had been building since he first saw those Japanese children in the hospital lobby. A rage against the machinery of war that transformed medicine into a weapon, that rendered human suffering into an acceptable cost. She is dying, he said, each word precisely enunciated. Every second we delay treatment brings her closer to death. I don't care about your clearances or your protocols or your intelligence concerns. Either help me save her life, or get the hell out of my way. Harris studied him for a long moment, then nodded to the nurse. Get him what he needs. The next 30 minutes unfolded in a blur of focused medical intervention. Whitaker worked methodically, administering medications, monitoring vital signs, fighting against the clock and the damage already done to Yuriko's system. The seizures gradually subsided, replaced by an unnatural stillness that was almost as concerning. Will she recover? Harris asked as Whitaker checked her pupils again, noting their sluggish response to light. If you're asking whether she'll survive to continue your interrogation, I can't say for certain, Whitaker replied without looking up. The poison has been in her system too long. There may be permanent damage to her nervous system, possibly her major organs. Harris moved closer, lowering his voice. This complicates matters significantly, Doctor. If someone attempted to silence her, then your security has been compromised, Whitaker finished for him, which means Akiko could be in danger as well. The realization struck them simultaneously. Harris was already moving toward the door when Whitaker called after him. I'm coming with you. Your duty is to your patient, Doctor. My duty is to all my patients, Whitaker corrected him. The nurse can monitor her condition. Akiko needs protection. Harris didn't waste time arguing. They moved through the corridors with renewed urgency, Parker struggling to keep pace as they retraced their steps to the conference room. The hospital seemed quieter now, the usual sounds of medical activity muffled and distant, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Whitaker's mind raced ahead, assembling pieces of a puzzle still largely hidden from him. James's photograph in Akiko's possession. Yuriko Tanaka with supposedly classified documents. A poisoning attempt that suggested powerful forces at work. What had his brother become involved in? And how had these Japanese civilians become entangled in it? They rounded the final corner to find two MPs stationed outside the conference room door, both at rigid attention. Everything appeared normal, yet something indefinable raised the hairs on the back of Whitaker's neck. Report, Harris demanded as they approached. No disturbances, sir, the senior MP replied. Doctor, Reynolds is still inside with the girl. Harris nodded and reached for the door handle. In that moment, Whitaker noticed something, a detail so small it almost escaped attention. A thin line of dark liquid seeping beneath the door, spreading across the polished floor tiles. Wait, he called out, but Harris had already pushed the door open. The scene inside the conference room would be forever etched into Whitaker's memory. Doctor. Reynolds lay sprawled near the examination table, a spreading pool of blood beneath his still form. The stenographer slumped over her typewriter, unmoving. And the examination table where Akiko had been, stood empty, the sheets in disarray, medical equipment scattered across the floor. Find the girl, Harris ordered instantly, his professional calm cracking for the first time. Lockdown protocols. No one enters or leaves this facility. Lieutenant Parker, coordinate with hospital security. As Parker rushed to execute the orders, Whitaker moved to Reynolds, dropping to his knees beside the fallen doctor. A quick examination confirmed what the substantial blood loss already suggested. Reynolds was beyond help, his carotid artery severed with surgical precision. Whoever had done this possessed medical knowledge and hadn't hesitated to use it lethally. She's been taken, Harris said, examining the room with the methodical attention of a trained intelligence operative. The question is by whom, and why now? Whitaker rose slowly, a cold clarity settling over him like a shroud. This isn't about espionage, he said with sudden certainty. This is about silencing witnesses. Explain, Harris demanded, his attention shifting fully to Whitaker. First, Yuriko is poisoned. Now Akiko is abducted. Someone is systematically removing everyone connected to whatever happened in that Japanese village. Whatever my brother was involved in. Harris absorbed this, his expression unreadable. If you're correct, Doctor, then there's a thread connecting these events that we haven't identified yet. He gestured to the map on the wall, specifically to a small island marked with a red pin. 6 months ago, your brother's unit was involved in an operation near this location. The official record states that they neutralized a Japanese intelligence outpost and recovered valuable documents. Casualties were reported as enemy combatants only. But your brother submitted a conflicting report, one that mentioned civilian casualties and possible violations of engagement protocols. His report was officially rejected due to lack of corroborating evidence. Harris's gaze sharpened. 2 weeks later, he was reassigned to a different unit. His original team continued operations without him. The implications hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. James had witnessed, or perhaps participated in, something his superiors wanted buried, something involving civilians like Akiko and her mother. My brother was trying to protect them, Whitaker said softly, the pieces finally clicking into place. The photograph, the English lessons. He was creating a way for them to find help if they ever reached America. A commotion in the hallway interrupted their conversation. Parker returned, his face flushed with exertion. Sir, we've found blood traces leading to the East Service entrance. A hospital vehicle is missing. We're establishing roadblocks, but they have at least a 15-minute head start. Harris moved toward the door, already issuing orders for expanded search parameters and communication with local law enforcement. In the chaos of the moment, no one noticed Whitaker slipping the map from the wall and folding it into his pocket. No one except Parker, whose eyes met Whitaker's in a moment of silent acknowledgement before deliberately turning away. Doctor? Harris called from the doorway. I need you to return to Yuriko Tanaka. She's our only remaining link to understanding this situation. Whitaker nodded, his decision already made, though he gave no outward sign of it. I'll do everything in my power to ensure she survives, he replied truthfully. What he left unsaid was that Yuriko's survival now represented more than a medical imperative. It had become his only hope of understanding what connected his family to these Japanese civilians, and possibly his only chance to save both Akiko and his brother from whatever deadly web they had become entangled in. As Harris and Parker departed to coordinate the search, Whitaker gazed once more at Reynolds' body, at the blood still slowly spreading across the conference room floor. I'll find her, he promised quietly, though whether he spoke to the dead doctor, to Akiko, or to himself remained unclear. And I'll find the truth. Dr. Whitaker's choice reminds us that even in our darkest hours we find moments that define not just who we are, but who we choose to become. When faced with an impossible decision, between following orders and following his conscience, he chose humanity over hatred, healing over harm. In the chaos of war, where enemies are defined by borders and uniforms, he saw only children in need. What would you have done in his place? Would you have risked everything, your career, your freedom, your life, to stand against the tide of fear and prejudice? The true battlefield of this story wasn't found on distant shores, but in the human heart, where courage confronts cowardice, where compassion challenges callousness. Sometimes the most heroic acts happen not on grand stages, but in quiet moments of decision, when one person refuses to let circumstances dictate their moral compass. As you reflect on this story, consider where in your own life you might stand against injustice, even when it would be easier to look away. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others who might need its message of courage and compassion in difficult times. Follow for more stories that explore the depths of human experience and the heights of human spirit.